Week 14, Overview, Blitzkrieg. It's time to plunge into death and destruction. We'll cover the first phase of World War II this week. Blitzkrieg, the Battle of France, the Battle of Britain, and the German invasion of Russia. It started with Poland. In Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler said the German super race of Aryans needed Lebensraum, living space, in order to multiply, prosper, and fulfill their destiny. He looked on neighboring Poland as the place to start. In Hitler's opinion, the Slavs and the Jews of Eastern Europe were unfit to live. They would be slaves as long as they were useful, and then they would die. On September 1st, at Hitler's word, the Germans invaded Poland without warning. Using highly coordinated modern war machines, the Germans conducted a Blitzkrieg, German for lightning war. Hitler first ordered a squadron of bombers to destroy the Polish air bases, railway stations, military headquarters, and ammunition centers. Once this was accomplished, dive bombers attacked the front line of the Polish troops. Tanks and other vehicles pushed through the weak spots in the Polish line and then attacked the Poles from behind. Lastly, large numbers of foot soldiers handled any further resistance. The Blitzkrieg against Poland took only a number of days. Although the Polish army was larger than the German army, the Poles had fewer tanks and aircraft and couldn't withstand the power of the Blitzkrieg. The Poles in eastern lands couldn't help their brothers. For 17 days after Germany's invasion, according to a secret agreement between Hitler and Stalin, Russian troops overran eastern Poland. As soon as they were in control, both conquering armies set about taking political and cultural prisoners and began the systematic extermination of millions of undesirable people. Hitler sent in the SS, the Nazi special forces, to kill Jews and anyone else who might oppose him. The Western democracies had warned Hitler that they would declare war with Germany if Poland was attacked. They dutifully did so, but there's a difference between declaring war and fighting it. The Western Allies could do nothing to prevent Hitler's and Stalin's overthrow of Poland. After its complete and sudden overthrow, however, their countries were at war. Germany and the Allies did not exchange hostilities for about 8 months. Both mobilized troops, though, and laid plans for a clash sometime in Western Europe. During this interval, called by journalists at the time the Phony War, Stalin decided to bring the Baltic countries of Finland, Latvia, and Lithuania under his dominion. Finland resisted him, so he invaded without properly equipping his soldiers. It took him much longer than he expected to dominate the tiny forces of this brave people, but Stalin won in the end. Hitler ended the Phony War by first attacking Norway and Denmark, subduing them in short order so as to have control over key air and naval bases there. His Blitzkrieg was again spectacularly successful. Denmark and Norway were his within 2 weeks, and the Western powers didn't successfully oppose him. He then turned to the strong defenses in France. France had spent decades building an impregnable line of defense against Germany. Hitler had a simple solution for this Maginot Line. He went around it. He attacked the Low Countries, Holland, Belgium, and Little Luxembourg. The Germans pierced the Allied defenses in Belgium and then swept through Holland. Belgium fell in 1 day, Holland in 5. The Battle of France began. It's arguable that if the Allies had taken action sooner and chosen the location of the front lines, Hitler would not have had the ability to circumvent the Maginot Line. As a result of Hitler's success, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain lost the confidence of his constituents and was forced to resign. King George VI named the head of the War Cabinet, Winston Churchill, as his new prime minister. Allied forces were not expecting a German onslaught through Belgium. The speed with which 2 German armies moved caught a large Allied force off guard. The Allied army was cut off in northern France by a German armored advance to the English Channel coast at Calais. Over 330,000 Allied troops were thus caught in a pocket, with Germans advancing from the south and from the northeast. These hundreds of thousands of men couldn't be reached by larger troop carriers because the harbor was choked with wrecked ships. The big ships had to stand out to sea. Men couldn't swim to the ships, and they couldn't transport their heavy machinery without vessels. Churchill, who'd only been prime minister for a couple of weeks, put out an urgent call, and private citizens from Great Britain, Holland, Belgium, France, and Poland set out in whatever small boats they had to brave the murderous artillery and the bombardment from German aircraft to take Allied soldiers off the beaches, to safety in England. Over 300,000, the bulk of the British army, were thus miraculously saved. This amazing rescue prompted one of Winston Churchill's most famous speeches. The day the last man was pulled off the beaches of Dunkirk, Churchill stood on the floor of the House of Commons and said, "We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight on the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." The incident gave much-needed cheer to the British, but it left the French to face Germany alone. France signed an armistice very shortly thereafter. Winston Churchill solemnly announced, "The Battle of France is over. I expect the Battle of Britain is about to begin." Churchill was right. With Italy allied, France fallen, the Low Countries occupied, Scandinavia neutralized, Spain under Franco, Germany's only opposition in Western Europe was Britain. Hitler launched Operation Sea Lion to pave the way for the invasion of Britain. Operation Sea Lion was Germany's attempt to invade Britain, and it began with the task of achieving air superiority over the English Channel. The commander-in-chief of the German Luftwaffe was Field Marshal Hermann Göring. Göring planned to draw British planes into battle by attacking convoy ships in the Channel. Once the planes came out, the Germans would destroy them and prepare for the invasion. Göring thought he could neutralize the Royal Air Force in a matter of days. Göring underestimated the RAF, however. In the dogfights over the Channel, the RAF destroyed 600 Luftwaffe planes, twice as many as the RAF lost. Göring responded by ordering attacks on British airfields and airplane factories. The RAF struggled for survival. Then, one day, the Germans bombed London by accident. It was an outrage to attack a civilian target, but it gave Churchill an opportunity to trick Hitler into making a strategic mistake. Churchill sent the RAF to bomb Berlin in retaliation. Churchill hoped that Hitler would lose his focus on the strategic goal of taking out the RAF, and it worked. Hitler was furious about the bombing of Berlin, and he ordered Göring to focus on bombing London. Thus began the Blitz that lasted until May 1941. The Blitz included both daytime and nighttime bombing of London and other cities. If your family's read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or seen the movie, you'll understand why the 4 children in that book had to flee London. Churchill praised the brave young men of the air who held off the Luftwaffe. "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." The Blitz was a time of terror for Londoners, but it gave Britain time it desperately needed. Although the Blitz caused a great deal of damage, the RAF had time to repair its airfields and rebuild itself. The German failure to destroy the RAF was the turning point in the Battle of Britain. Hitler was forced to recognize, for the first time in the war, that his will had been thwarted. With Britain holding out against Germany, Hitler decided to turn on Stalin. In December 1940, he started making plans to invade Russia. In June 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa. 4.5 million Axis soldiers crossed the border into the Soviet Union. At first, many Russians hailed the Germans as liberators who had come to free them from Stalin's violent rule. Soon, however, the Russians discovered that the Germans viewed them with racial contempt, believing them to be inferior beings marked for destruction. The siege of Leningrad, where thousands died due to starvation and disease, was just one example of how the German invasion caused terrible suffering for Soviet citizens. The Soviet civilians thus found a cause around which they could unite, the goal of defeating the Germans and forcing them out of Mother Russia. They mounted such fierce resistance that Hitler's army was forced to withdraw until spring. Hitler ordered a 3-prong attack. One army group went north to Leningrad, originally named and now renamed St. Petersburg. One group went east to Moscow, and one group went south into the Ukraine. At first, the German armies cut through Russia like a hot knife through butter. But the blitzkrieg tactics that worked so well in small and middle-sized countries broke down in a nation as vast as Russia. Tanks could race hundreds of miles into enemy territory, but they had to be supported by foot soldiers at some point, and it took weeks for soldiers to walk across Russia. The northern and southern army groups bogged down. Hitler ordered his middle army group, the one headed for Moscow, to slow down its advance so that all three would achieve simultaneous victories. When his generals asked for extra supplies for winter fighting, he turned them down. He insisted that the army would triumph in short order and that neither the soldiers' clothing nor their war machinery needed to be prepared for winter. Both decisions proved to be arrogant and disastrous. Napoleon had learned how hard Russia can be on invaders. As the Soviet army stiffened its resistance, Hitler's forces slowed. The Russians were caught out far from home by Russia's old ally, winter. It was a time of terror and heroism. Winston Churchill was only able to offer his suffering people blood, sweat, toil, and tears as they stood against Germany. With troops marching deep into Russia, Hitler was at the high water mark of his career. With Britain hanging on, Russia fighting back, and America starting to ship supplies, however, Hitler had gone as far as he would go. Next week, we'll see the tides of war begin to turn.